Jane is a client-friendly online booking platform with effortless scheduling and payments and an attentive, approachable, and accessible team behind it. Jane has been the solution for so many mental health practitioners to help grow their business. Learn more at jane.app/mental health. From the moment that you're born, unbeknownst to you, you're in a relationship. We are, after all, social beings born of other social beings. Psychologists and psychoanalysts and pediatric physicians have written for decades about the significance of our early childhood relationships and their impact on our adult connections. And yet, it was a happy coincidence that led Victoria to a relational therapist where she could explore her early childhood relationships experienced through the lens of the divorce of her parents. I'm Talia Singer, and this is WhateverWorks. Today I'm talking with Victoria and her experience with relational therapy. Hi, Victoria. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Victoria, I hear that you've done relational therapy, and I'm really interested in hearing more about it.
That's great. Yes, I have. I've been doing it for about almost 3 years now.
Mm-hmm. How did you find relational therapy in the first place?
It was a complete accident, to be honest. It was kind of a long journey for me up to really deciding that I needed therapy, that I wanted to go to therapy, and also finding a therapist. It took a few years, and it turns out that in the end, I just decided, okay, I need to ask someone for someone for help before I got help. And so I asked a friend who I knew was seeing a therapist and whose opinion I trusted and who I kind of knew was going through some similar things that I was. And so I asked her how she found her therapist. And she actually shared her therapist's name with me. And that is who ended up actually becoming my therapist. And it just happened to be that she practiced relational therapy and I just really connected with it. So it was a complete accident.
Well, that's great. So you didn't set out seeking a relational therapist. You found someone that you enjoy talking to, and this is the style of therapy they just happen to be doing.
Yeah, correct.
Mm-hmm. And so had you ever been to therapy before?
Not that I remembered. I had been to kind of counseling before when I was really young because my parents got divorced. So, that age-old story.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember. I just remember having gone, but I don't remember what it felt like or outcomes or anything like that.
And so I'm curious what had you feeling connected, or you said you connected with this technique. And I'm wondering, what was it about relational therapy that felt right to you?
Well, the basis of relational therapy, as I understand it, is that all of our reactions to things that happen in our lives can be traced back to an early relationship in our life and how that relationship affected us, which could be, from what I've learned, could be a parent or a caregiver or an early boss in your career or a sibling, kind of any of those important relationships. And when I started going to therapy and kind of talking to my therapist about the help I thought I needed and the things I thought I wanted to change. And she started asking me about, my relationship with my parents and grandparents and all these kind of things. I really did feel like the ways I was reacting in current situations really did connect to those earlier memories of like being a kid with my parents and, what happened in those situations. And it just made sense to me. And I liked the, almost like the explanation of like, this is why you're feeling a certain way. This is why you may be reacting in a certain way is because of how your relationship with your mother was, for example. And it made sense to me, and it made me feel like it made me feel less crazy. It was just like, okay, this makes sense. This is a very natural reaction. And now we can find the best way to deal with it.
It sounds like following a trail of emotional breadcrumbs until you reach the source of that emotion, the first time you felt this way in relation to another person. And that, could kind of like cause a ripple effect in how you're feeling in present day, dealing with a very similar emotion. Would you agree with that kind of like
absolutely
metaphor?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Actually, that's exactly what it feels like. It's just, following those breadcrumbs to that first time and then thinking, oh yeah, this made me feel bad, for instance, or like this made me feel angry and I never dealt with it. And maybe I didn't even realize that it made me feel angry until I followed those breadcrumbs. That's a perfect example.
Was it scary at all to kind of like understand that a single experience with someone could have such a big impact on your life?
Actually, it wasn't. And it's funny you say that because I have had conversations with friends who did feel that way, who kind of felt like they didn't like to think that this one fleeting moment in their life has such an impact on who they were. But I personally found comfort in it, that it gave it a reason, even as, like you said, it was kind of this one little moment. It just made me feel like, okay, there's a reason for this and there's a reason for why I'm feeling a certain way. It was like something to hold on to.
And once you find the reason, and I think that it's very similar in psychoanalysis, they call it the navel. And so once you find the source, how does it change how you're doing or what you're doing in the present?
That's a great question. Sometimes there were a couple of things that I kind of recognized, like, oh, this is the root cause of this certain situation. Like, I know why I feel this way, but undoing this is going to be scary.
Well, I'll tell you that sometimes I personally find that the knowing, it's enough. It doesn't have to change your current situation, but just knowing brings a kind of internal calm or peace. And I'll give you a personal example that I recently, a couple of years ago, came to the conclusion that the reason that I was so attracted to the nursing profession, to be a nurse, is because my grandmother had been studying nursing, before the Holocaust, and she was a nurse's aide in the hospital in Rotterdam. And she couldn't continue her studies because of the Holocaust, and she never was able to continue and become a nurse. And I remember her face when I told her that I was going to study nursing, and I think that it was a huge reason of why I became a nurse, simply to see that face.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very small. I think that it can work very similarly with either negative experiences or emotions that we have or patterns in our relationship.
Yeah, it's actually funny that you mentioned that because I had a similar experience, in a, like you said, maybe in a more in a negative way, but it was something that, I was talking to my therapist about things I thought I should be feeling or that I should be doing. And when I was talking to her about it, I was saying that this doesn't feel like me. Like, I don't necessarily feel like I am a should type of person. I don't feel like I don't really care what other people think of me necessarily. So why am I so worried about these things I should be doing? We kind of talked about that a little bit. And then in a completely different session, I was talking about my grandma, and I mentioned about how she was always so concerned about what we should be doing. Your house should look a certain way. You should live a certain life. You should have a certain job. And it was just like that. I just saw it all come together in that moment. And I was like, wow, okay, that might be where I have that should thing. Like, maybe that is where, like, I didn't even realize that it had impacted me, or like it was something that had affected me. But like you said, just that knowing of like, okay, I see that connection and now I kind of understand it. And I was almost just like able to let it go.
Hi, I'm Sophia from the Jane team. We understand that it can seem overwhelming to transition to a new software. However, with Jane, you're not alone. Jane's support team offers multiple touchpoints along the way to ensure you're up and running as smoothly and as quickly as possible. We're in this together. Jane is a Canadian-based PIPEDA-compliant practice management software, offering a range of different features including customizable electronic therapy notes, secure telehealth sessions, simple online booking, family relationships, and more, all on our Canadian-based servers. If you have any questions whether Jane is the right fit for your practice, we'd love to chat with you. Watch a demo and connect with us by visiting jane.app/mental health.
Do you feel like sometimes being able to connect some of your feelings or thoughts or even behaviors to people from the past, especially I think I find people who are no longer here, invokes their memory and just brings them close to you for better or for worse?
Yeah, I think so. And I definitely think that was another thing that I learned a bit more about through that relational therapy and about learning about these relationships, because I was very lucky that I had four of my grandparents, or actually all of my grandparents were alive until I was almost 30. And I was really lucky about that. But kind of everybody before that, I don't really have a connection to, because my grandparents came to Canada during the Second World War. And so there's like the kind of disconnect, but I was able to talk in therapy about like, this is how my grandparents felt about certain things, and this is how I feel about them. And it kind of, there was a connection there that I didn't even realize, but it gave me that opportunity to talk about it and to kind of connect with it, which was really special, because it was another thing that I didn't realize I was missing or wanted to talk about. My therapist is always asking me about family really far back, like, well, what did your grandma's mom do? Or do you know about X? And it's always such an interesting conversation to have that connection to all those people.
Victoria, I usually ask people who come on this podcast if they have a story to tell me from therapy. And I'm wondering if you have a story.
One of the reasons that I originally went to therapy is because I am I'm an only child. My mom is a single mom. I'm a very solitary person naturally. But then I knew that things that had happened to me throughout my life and in my childhood had made me hyper independent and kind of hyper responsible. And I finally reached the point where I was like, I know that this is not serving me anymore, and it's not allowing me the life that I want. But past that, I kind of didn't know anything else. I didn't know what I needed help with. I didn't know anything past that, I need some help. And not luckily, because it felt kind of bad, but also luckily while I was in therapy, I started seeing someone. And whenever I have been dating people in the past, that's kind of where so many of my anxieties and kind of what I've now learned to be traumas have surfaced. It's the one place where I just felt totally out of control and not like myself. And so I was dating someone, and thankfully, because I got to, and I was seeing my therapist, and so I got to tell her everything that I'd been feeling and how it was making me feel. And throughout this experience, it was a couple of months, I think 3 or 4 months. And throughout the period, through talking to my therapist, I discovered that I was experiencing kind of mild panic attacks, which I had no idea that was what that was. I genuinely thought that that's just how you felt when you were dating.
Oh, can you describe the mild panic attacks? Now I'm curious. Well,
it was, and kind of past that, which also ties into it, is I also we kind of discovered that I was suffering from some, also not mild, but some OCD type tendencies that kind of tied together. And so the panic attacks were I got so anxious about either seeing this person or getting texts from them, or it was just kind of a constant feeling throughout my day. And it was intrusive thoughts, and just the same thoughts over and over and over again. Kind of a worry about, are they gonna text me? They don't want to, of course they're not going to text me. Why would they text me? This is going to end badly, because it always ends badly. Those kind of thoughts. And also then not being able to eat, just appetite completely gone, and physically not able to really chew or swallow anything because I was so anxious.
The unknown.
But I didn't know that that's what that was. She was no, you sound like you're experiencing like mild grade panic attack. That's not how you should be feeling. So it was kind of that number one realization of like, oh, this isn't normal. Like there isn't anything wrong with you. Cause I'd always felt like this is something that everybody else experiences, but they seem to enjoy it. And so because I'm not enjoying it, something must be wrong with me, which something was wrong with me, but not quite in the same way that I expected. So kind of having that realization, putting like a name to something I was experiencing, first of all, was like the most incredible relief that I almost have ever felt. It just took like this complete weight off my shoulders.
Putting a name on it.
Yeah. Putting a name on it and saying like, you should not be feeling this way. And it's okay to not want to feel this way.
Sometimes it's like finding an X on a map that says, you are here.
Yes. 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 It did feel like that. It was just like someone looking at me who knew what they were talking about, who could just say like,
oh, I know where you are. You're here. That's what they did. Now, once you find out you are here, were you able then to follow the breadcrumb trail back to the origin of that feeling? And did it involve a relationship?
Yes. I mean, like, I kind of laugh about it because it's so cliche. Like, it's not anything exciting. It is, the very common father-daughter relationship. But it was in a way that I didn't realize I'd been carrying that long. My dad, we have a pretty good relationship, but he did, move back to the country that he's from after my parents got divorced. And I didn't realize that I was holding on. And I kind of created some narratives in my head about what that meant and how it related to me. And then another thing that I kind of realized in this process of dating this person when we ultimately broke up, but I had this huge epiphany of, I had really liked this person and I'd felt this horrible panicky feeling the whole time. And I remember being in the shower and I'd realized that the last person I had dated, I didn't really like that much, but I'd had that same panicky feeling about them. And I just remember thinking, oh, wow, this has nothing to do with the person I'm seeing.
Oh, wow. That's a big realization.
Yeah, it was huge. And thankfully I was in the shower because you can have a nice cry in the shower. But I was like, wow, it has nothing to do with this person. I think I'd been waiting that I was like, when the right person comes into my life, it'll feel right. It'll be easy. And I had this moment where I was like, no, you are going to feel this way no matter who it is until you find the core and deal with it and kind of work through to the other side of it. And it was such a huge revelation because it also didn't just relate to how I felt when I was dating, but I could kind of see that through everything in my life. When you feel a certain way, you have to take control of how that feels and what you can do about it. Because if you never work through your stuff, the situation will never be right.
It sounds like this very tender and vulnerable moment in the shower was also hugely empowering. Like, it's like, oh, it's me, and so for a moment you have a moment of grief, like, oh, it's me. But then you're like, oh, it's me. Yeah. You're like, I can do something about that.
Yeah. It's so funny you say that because that's exactly what happened. I had a pretty big moment of grief that lasted a little while where I was like, I have let this go on for so long, or like I have been the one that has been getting in my own way this whole time. But then when I kind of got through that grief to the other side, it was like, okay, now I am the one who's in control then of how I react to all of this. And it does feel very empowering.
There's something that you said before, and I actually try to never do this but I have to go back and say that when you called the relationship, the issues that you were having with the guys that you were dating as cliche as being, like father issues, I think that it's important to note that yes, they are cliche because it's such an important relationship in your life, your parents. so important. Why wouldn't it be formative?
Yeah. And that's one of the things that relational therapy has really taught me to be okay with. And that's why I kind of laugh about it, because it is, I don't know if that's just like a way to deal with it, but it does kind of make me laugh that it's just like, oh, all of us with our parent issues, like it's almost like you can't avoid it, like no matter how good your relationship is with your parents, they will screw you up in some way, and it's okay.
Therapy, it really is for everyone.
Yeah.
These are, some of the most important relationships you'll ever have. And in some ways serve as an origin of emotions. The first time that, you laugh, it's typically with your parents. The first time that you cry, it's always with them.
I think that's one of the things too that makes me feel, which is why I like this type of therapy, kind of connecting everything back to that, is because that does make sense to me. Like you said, it's your first huge relationship in your life, and one that's going to last through everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason for all of this. Like, it's almost like I'm just like everybody else. Like, all of our brains are just working in this same weird way.
Do you think that there's any other techniques that your therapist used that's specific to relational therapy that you want to mention?
I'm not sure if it's specific to relational therapy. Well, one thing that my therapist is always a big proponent of, that you always have to feel your feelings. You can't think your way through them. So when we kind of discover these connections and these breadcrumbs, you have to feel whatever comes from that.
But it sounds like it is very closely tied to traditional psychoanalysis, where you are observing yourself as a young child sitting at your parents' lap. Or if you're not sitting at their lap, that's what you're observing, the lack of a lap to sit on.
Mm-hmm. It's actually funny that you mentioned that. That is definitely another thing that kind of that working with your inner child
Mm-hmm.
Is another big part of what I've been doing with my therapist, and learning to, in those moments, if you kind of have a flare up or like a reminder of something, is taking that moment to have a conversation with your inner child. What do you wish someone would have told you? What does that inner child need to hear? And those can be tougher conversations. Those usually can make me pretty emotional, but they are, like you said, kind of almost giving that inner child the lap to sit on that they didn't have before has been really transformational as well.
This has been the 5th and final episode of Season 2 of WhateverWorks. I'm Talia Singer. This podcast is written and produced by me and edited by David Conroy and Jason Ball. The theme song for this podcast is called Universal Donor, off the album Hopeful Monster, written and performed by Jason Ball. You can find it on Spotify and Apple Music.